From a teen star typecast by Dawson's Creek, Michelle Williams staged a spectacular escape from her girl-next-door image. She dove into gritty, complex roles that exposed the rawest psychological scars, from the tormented wife in Brokeback Mountain and the decaying marriage in Blue Valentine to the bottomless grief of a mother in Manchester by the Sea. But just as her career was soaring, her private life suddenly shattered, thrusting her into the media spotlight in the most devastating way. Behind that fragile exterior and those mournful eyes lies a phenomenal acting prowess specializing in roles defined by tragedy and loss. Michelle Williams doesn't just act out tragedy, she seems to inhabit it. But few knew that her ability to touch the depths of that pain was forged by a shocking real-life tragedy. She transformed her personal loss into a haunting art form, leaving the world holding its breath. She was born on September 9, 1980, not in Los Angeles, but in the rugged, isolated heart of Kalispell, Montana, a land of vast skies and fierce independence. Her mother, Carla, was a homemaker, but her father, Larry R. Williams, was a figure of immense, restless energy. A renowned commodities trader and two-time Republican candidate for the U.S. Senate, he embodied a world of high-stakes, intellectual debate and the core belief that you could will your own destiny into existence. This environment of ambition and risk-taking profoundly shaped her. When she was 9, the family moved from the quiet isolation of Montana to the sun-drenched sprawl of San Diego, California. The culture shock was immediate. She was enrolled in Santa Fe Christian School, a private religious school where she never felt she fit in. She was a quiet, introverted child, and she later described her school days as deeply unhappy, feeling awkward and out of place among her peers. It was in San Diego that a spark was lit. A local stage production of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer gave her a sudden, profound sense of clarity. She knew what she had to do. Her father, seeing his own ambitious streak in her, began driving her for hours to auditions in Los Angeles. This became her new reality, a grueling trek up the E5, mixed with the social isolation of a school she loathed, the grind of a child actor, endless rejections, cattle calls, was brutal, but it was also an escape route. She began to land small parts. Her first was a 1993 guest spot on Baywatch. A year later, she landed her first feature film, Lassie. This early success only solidified her ambition, but it also created a conflict. Child labor laws strictly limited her working hours, and every hour spent on set was an hour away from a school she already despised. The system was holding her back both professionally and personally. This is where her story takes its first and perhaps most shocking turn. This is the moment that defines her entire future trajectory. At the age of 15, Michelle Williams, with her parents' blessing, did something most teenagers can't even fathom. She filed for legal emancipation. She, in the eyes of the law, divorced her parents. Now, this is a crucial distinction. In Hollywood lore, emancipation stories are almost always dark, traumatic tales. This was not that. Williams has been clear. This was a purely professional decision. It was not born of anger or rebellion. It was born of cold, hard, calculated ambition. By becoming a legal adult at 15, she was no longer bound by child labor laws. She could work 12, 14, 16-hour days. She could compete with the 18-year-olds. It is an astonishing act of focus. She immediately dropped out of Santa Fe Christian School, which she loathed, and completed her entire high school education, a GED, via correspondence in just 9 months. The moment the emancipation was granted, she packed her bags, moved to Los Angeles, and got her own flat in Burbank. A 15-year-old girl, living alone, legally an adult, in one of the most ruthless cities on earth, all in pursuit of a dream. She was not waiting for permission. She was taking control. That calculated, audacious move paid off almost immediately. The 15-year-old girl, alone in Burbank, had successfully broken into the industry. But the role she landed wasn't just a job. It was a cultural atom bomb. The show, Dawson's Creek, would give her the fame she thought she wanted, but it would also build a gilded cage, trapping her in the one persona she loathed, the teen idol. Her next battle wouldn't be against labor laws. It would be against her own public face, forcing her to plot a secret, artistic escape. Living alone in Burbank, Michelle Williams was now a legal 18 in the eyes of casting directors, free to audition for anything and work all the hours God sends. After a few small parts, she walked into an audition at 16 for a new teen drama by screenwriter Kevin Williamson. The show was called Dawson's Creek. In 1998, Dawson's Creek exploded onto television screens. It wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural phenomenon. It landed on the cover of Rolling Stone. It redefined the teen drama, replacing the earnest morals of 90210 with hyper-articulate, self-aware teenagers who spoke in dense paragraphs of pop culture analysis and armchair psychology. Alongside James Vanderbeek Dawson, Katie Holmes, Joey, and Joshua Jackson Pacey, Michelle Williams became one of the most famous young faces on the planet. She played Jen Lindley, the bad girl from New York, sent to the idyllic fictional small town of Capeside, North Carolina, to live with her Grams after her wildlife spiraled. Jen was the cynical, wounded, complex counterpoint to Katie Holmes's innocent girl-next-door Joey Potter. She was the worldly, tragic figure who arrived in town and immediately disrupted the lives of the core trio. For millions of young fans, Michelle was Jen Lindley. The show was a rocket to a level of stardom she could never have imagined in her small Burbank flat. The emancipation had worked beyond her wildest dreams. But almost immediately, Michelle felt the trap closing in. She was grateful, as she has since said, for the stability. The show plucked her out of the dangerous isolation of being a 16-year-old alone in L.A. and placed her in the sleepy coastal town of Wilmington, North Carolina, where the show filmed. It gave her a job, a purpose, and financial security for the first time in her life. But artistically, she was suffocating. She despised the box it put her in. She was now a teen idol, a Pop-Tart, as she later scathingly called it. Her face was on lunchboxes, her love life a subject of endless magazine speculation. This was not the career she had emancipated herself for. She hadn't left home at 15 to become a poster on a teenager's wall. She had done it to act, to build a career of substance, like the ones she admired. She later described her time on the show with a stunning, revealing metaphor. She said she felt like a gangster. You know, you're publicly doing one thing and secretly you're plotting another. And plot she did. For 6 years, she lived a double life. For 9 months of the year, she was in Wilmington playing Jen Lindley, delivering lines she often felt were inauthentic. But the moment the show went on its 3-month hiatus, she didn't fly to tropical islands or party in Hollywood. She fled. She flew to New York City. She got a small apartment and began to build a secret second identity. In this life, she was not Jen Lindley. She was a budding artiste. She actively sought out the grittiest, strangest, most challenging, and decidedly uncommercial material she could find. She was conducting her own private acting education. While her co-stars were branching into mainstream rom-coms and studio pictures, Michelle was doing other things. Her choices during this period are a fascinating roadmap of her ambition. In 1998, the same year Dawson's premiered, she made a savvy commercial move, Halloween H20. It was a smart, high-profile horror sequel that kept her on the big screen, but her next move was a sharp left turn. In 1999, she co-starred with Kirsten Dunst in Dick, a brilliant, quirky, and surrealist satire that reimagined the Watergate scandal. They played two ditzy 15-year-old girls who, while wandering away from a White House tour, accidentally meet President Nixon, get hired as his dog walkers, and become deep throat, inadvertently bringing down the presidency. The film was smart, weird, and a critical darling, signaling her offbeat, intelligent taste. But the real turning point, the true beginning of her education, as she called it, also came in 1999. She was offered a choice. On one hand, a big-budget, high-paying role in a mainstream cheerleader movie, likely Bring It On. On the other, a tiny, low-paying part in an aggressive, dark, and violent off-Broadway play by Tracy Letts called Killer Joe. For her, it wasn't a choice at all. She took the play. She spent her hiatus at the Soho Playhouse in New York, performing in this brutal play night after night. It was the first time she was on a stage, the first time she was surrounded by serious, dedicated theater actors. It was, as she said, the first time she was taken seriously as an actor by herself and by others. She was finding her tribe, her taste, and her method far from the teen magazine covers. As Dawson's Creek wound down towards its 2003 finale, where her character Jen was poignantly killed off, Michelle was already building her escape route. She dove headfirst into the world of independent film, continuing her secret plot. In 2001, she starred in Me Without You, a British film co-starring Anna Friel. It was a psychologically savvy drama tracking the toxic, codependent friendship of two girls from childhood into their adult lives. It was another complex, female-led, non-commercial story that cemented her indie credentials. And then, in 2003, the very same year Dawson's Creek aired its finale, she appeared in a small, quiet, beautiful film called The Station Agent. The film was the breakout hit of the Sundance Film Festival. It was the story of three lonely, disconnected people. Finbar, played by the brilliant Peter Dinklage, a man with dwarfism who inherits a derelict train depot, Joe, Bobby Cannavale, an overly friendly coffee vendor, and Olivia, Patricia Clarkson, a grieving artist. Williams had a small but pivotal role as Emily, a young librarian who, in her own quiet way, is as lonely as the main trio. The film was the toast of the indie world. It was smart, human, funny, and deeply moving. For Michelle Williams, The Station Agent was more than a film. It was a statement of intent. It was the final definitive act of her 6-year gangster plot. The teen idol was dead. The artist had arrived. She had successfully and secretly plotted her way out of the Pop-Tart box. She was now a respected independent actress, a peer of the people she most admired, and her next move would change her life in Hollywood forever. By 2004, Michelle Williams had successfully executed the most difficult maneuver in show business. She had transformed in the public imagination from a teen soap, Pop-Tart, to a serious, respected darling of the independent film scene. She was 24, living in New York, and fiercely dedicated to a craft she had sacrificed her childhood for. She was no longer plotting her escape. She was living it. And then a script landed on her desk that was already the stuff of Hollywood legend. It was based on a short story by Annie Proulx, a story so powerful, so raw, and so controversial that it had been sitting in development hell for years, deemed unfilmable and toxic to a mainstream career. The film was Brokeback Mountain. The director was the Academy Award-winning Ang Lee. It was the story of two cowboys, Ennis Del Mar and Jack Twist, who are hired for a summer herding sheep on the desolate, beautiful Brokeback Mountain in 1963. In that isolation, they fall into a passionate, secret love that will define and ultimately destroy both of their lives. The script was a masterpiece of sparse, heartbreaking prose, but it was dangerous. In the early 2000s, a mainstream film about a gay love story between two rugged, all-American cowboys was a third rail. Michelle was cast as Alma Beers, the wife of Ennis Del Mar. On paper, it was a difficult, almost thankless role. Alma is not the hero. She is not the focus of the great romance. She is the collateral damage. She is the woman who builds a life, a home, a family, with a man who is fundamentally absent, his heart and soul locked away on a mountain with another man. It's a role that requires an actress to absorb a lifetime of quiet disappointment and repressed rage. The part of Ennis Del Mar, the stoic, emotionally constipated center of the film, was to be played by a young, charismatic Australian actor who, like Michelle, was on his own mission. He too was trying to escape the shadow of his teen heartthrob past from films like 10 Things I Hate About You. His name was Heath Ledger. The connection, by all accounts, was immediate. On set, in the rugged, sweeping landscapes of the Canadian Rockies, standing in for Wyoming, a real love story blossomed in parallel to the fictional one. The chemistry between Heath and Michelle was palpable to everyone. There is a famous oft-told story from the set that perfectly captures the moment. During a scene where Ennis and Alma are joyfully tobogganing down a hill, Michelle took a tumble. The sled went off course and she hurt her knee. She was shaken, in pain. Heath was by her side in an instant. He didn't just help her up, he held her, comforted her, his concern so transparent, his focus so entirely on her, that everyone watching knew this was not acting. Director Ang Lee later said, "The day Heath and Michelle fell in love, that was the day I was shooting the tobogganing scene." Heath, in his intense, all-in way, was completely captivated. He was devoted to her from that moment. Their love was intense, fast, and all-consuming. They were the new indie film golden couple. They were young, beautiful, immensely talented, and dedicated to their art, not the celebrity machine. After filming Wrapped, they were inseparable. They shunned the Hollywood lifestyle, choosing instead to build a home in the one place Michelle felt she truly belonged, New York. They moved into a townhouse in Boerum Hill, Brooklyn, and quickly became the neighborhood's most famous yet most normal residents. They were the quintessential Brooklyn family. They were spotted at local cafes, browsing in bookshops, pushing their daughter in a buggy. And in October 2005, just before Brokeback Mountain was set to be released to the world, their daughter, Matilda Rose, was born. They were a family. They had built a quiet, private world for themselves, a fortress of normalcy against the storm of fame they both knew was coming. That winter, the film was released. It was not just a film. It was an earthquake. Brokeback Mountain shattered cultural taboos. It was reviewed not just as a gay cowboy movie, but as one of the great tragic love stories of a generation. It was a masterpiece, a heartbreaking, beautiful, and devastating piece of cinema that forced a global conversation. It went on to earn 8 Academy Award nominations, including Best Director for Ang Lee and acting nominations for both Ledger and his co-star Jake Gyllenhaal. And amongst those towering performances, Michelle Williams' quiet, agonizing portrayal of Alma resonated with devastating power. She was nominated for her first Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. The 15-year-old girl who emancipated herself to work longer hours was now an Oscar nominee, recognized by her peers for the highest achievement in her craft. Her performance is a study in subtraction. It's all in the silences. The entire film pivots on a single wordless scene. Alma, sorting laundry, looks out the window and sees her husband, Ennis, passionately kiss Jack Twist in a hidden alleyway. We watch her face as she processes the information. It is not a moment of screaming or melodrama. It is the slow, dawning horror, the silent internal crumbling of her entire world, of her past, present, and future. It is a masterclass in subtlety, and it proved she could stand shoulder to shoulder with the greatest actors in the world. For the next 2 years, Heath and Michelle were the center of this new creative Brooklyn universe. They were intensely private, building their life around Matilda. But the pressures of fame, of 2 white-hot careers pulling them in opposite directions, began to take a toll. And Heath's own intense, all-consuming approach to his work became a source of deep friction. Heath Ledger did not act, he became. When he took on a role, it devoured him. He was preparing for his role as the Joker in The Dark Knight, a part that would require him to dive into the darkest, most chaotic parts of his own psyche. He was famously struggling with insomnia, his mind racing, unable to shut down. His reliance on prescription medication to sleep, to manage his anxiety, and to simply function under the immense pressure grew. The couple, who had seemed so perfect, so intertwined, began to drift apart. The pressures of their careers and Heath's personal struggles became a chasm they couldn't bridge. In the autumn of 2007, just after Matilda's 2nd birthday, they quietly separated. It was a painful, heartbreaking split. Michelle stayed in the Brooklyn house with their daughter. Heath, heartbroken himself, moved to a bachelor apartment in the Soho neighborhood of Manhattan. They were navigating the difficult, messy, and painful world of co-parenting, still deeply connected but no longer a couple. They were trying to find a new normal. And then on January 22nd, 2008, the unthinkable happened. Heath Ledger was found dead in his Manhattan apartment. He was 28 years old. The cause of death, ruled by the medical examiner, was an accidental overdose, a toxic combination of 6 different prescription medications, painkillers, anti-anxiety drugs, and sleeping pills. The news was a global shockwave. The world lost a generational talent at the absolute peak of his powers. But for Michelle Williams, it was a personal apocalypse. Her grief was not private. It couldn't be. The paparazzi, who had always buzzed around them, descended like vultures. This was not the usual celebrity coverage. It was a grotesque, terrifying, and relentless siege. They stalked her. They staked out her home. They photographed her, a 27-year-old woman, utterly broken, walking the streets of her own neighborhood, her face a mask of raw, unfathomable grief. They photographed her at his funeral. They photographed her trying to take her daughter to the park. They hounded her, screamed at her, chased her car. It was a grotesque, terrifying invasion, a public spectacle made of her private agony. She later said with heartbreaking simplicity, "I lost my city. Brooklyn, the home she and Heath had built, the place she felt safe, was now a prison." She said, "I lost my sense of humor. I don't know, it's like everything it changed." Her life, her career, her very identity had been irrevocably split into 2. There was the time before Heath and the time after. In the immediate aftermath, she retreated completely. She took a long-planned hiatus from work. Her only focus, her entire world, became Matilda, this tiny, living, breathing piece of Heath. Her singular mission was to protect her daughter from the storm, to create a bubble of normalcy in a world that had gone insane. Poignantly, a small, quiet film she had made just before the split, during that period of emotional turmoil, was released in late 2008. It was called Wendy and Lucy, directed by Kelly Reichardt. In it, she played Wendy, a destitute, profoundly lonely woman, traveling to Alaska with her only companion in the world, her dog, Lucy. When her car breaks down and Lucy is lost, Wendy's fragile, threadbare world completely collapses. The performance, filmed when her own life was quietly falling apart, was a raw nerve. It was devoid of all vanity. She looked gaunt, haunted, broken, and desperate. The critics were astonished. It was a performance of almost unbearable sadness and truth. It was impossible to separate the art from the life. The film cemented her as one of the great serious actresses of her generation, but it was a victory that surely felt hollow, a ghost on the screen. She had survived the teen idol trap. She had survived the sudden explosion of Oscar-level fame. Now she had to survive a tragedy that would have destroyed most people. She had to find a way to work, to raise her daughter, and to live, all while carrying a grief that the entire world was watching. The next chapter of her life would be forged in that fire. In the immediate aftermath of the apocalypse, there is only silence. After the blinding, grotesque flash of public tragedy in 2008, Michelle Williams disappeared. She did the only thing she could do. She retreated from the world, took her planned hiatus, and focused every ounce of her being on the one thing that mattered: protecting her daughter, Matilda, and creating a private, quiet space for their shared grief. The world could watch, and it did, but she refused to let it in. For a time, her career was an afterthought, a life left behind. But Michelle Williams was not just a mother. She was, to her core, an artist. And for an artist, the only way to process the unimaginable is to work. The only way to make sense of a life that has been shattered is to build something new from the ruins. When she finally tentatively returned to a film set, the work was different. It had to be. She was different. The roles she chose were no longer about an ambitious young actress plotting her escape from teen fame. They were excavations. She was drawn with an almost gravitational pull to roles that explored the very things she was navigating in private: the fracturing of love, the unbearable weight of loss, and the agonizing day-by-day effort it takes to survive. In 2010, she starred opposite Ryan Gosling in Blue Valentine. It was a script she had been attached to for years, long before Heath's death, back when she was just 21. But the film that was made was profoundly different and more devastating because of the woman she had become. It is an agonizingly realistic portrait of a marriage disintegrating. The film is shot in two distinct intercut timelines: the joyful, romantic, sun-drenched beginning of their relationship and the bitter, toxic, emotionally ravaged end years later. To prepare, director Derek Cianfrance didn't just have them rehearse, he had them live. In an extraordinary and brutal act of method preparation, he, Williams, and Gosling moved into a house in rural Pennsylvania for 1 month with the young actress who played their daughter. This wasn't a game. They brought their own clothes, their own pictures. They lived on a real, tight budget, simulating the financial pressures that grind a family down. They bought groceries, cooked meals, paid bills, and, most harrowingly, were instructed to stage and film their own arguments. They lived the life of this fictional married couple, simulating the slow build of resentment, familiarity, and claustrophobia. They even celebrated a fake Christmas and a fake birthday, creating a bank of memories to draw from. Then, after building this life, Cianfrance had them symbolically destroy it, asking them to burn their prop wedding photos in an oil drum. The result is almost too painful to watch. It is a masterpiece of emotional realism, a film that feels less acted and more overheard. Her performance as Cindy, a woman who has fallen out of love with her husband, a woman who feels trapped in a life she no longer wants, is devastating. You watch her spirit curdle. The performance is not in what she says, but in her silences, her flinches, the way she holds her body in a state of permanent recoil from the man she once adored. It was an act of profound artistic bravery, a willingness to dive headfirst into the very subject of love's decay. The world took notice. She earned her second Academy Award nomination and her first in the lead Best Actress category. She was no longer just the grieving widow of the tabloids. She was once again a formidable artist, channeling her pain into something raw, honest, and undeniable. The very next year, she took on a challenge that many, including herself, would have called impossible. She agreed to play Marilyn Monroe. This was not a biopic. This was My Week with Marilyn, 2011, a film focused on a specific chaotic period in 1956 during the filming of The Prince and the Showgirl. The pressure was immense. How do you play the world's greatest icon, the most photographed, most imitated, most mythologized woman of the 20th century, without it being a high school impersonation? Williams, who bears little physical resemblance to Monroe, was terrified. She later admitted to waking up in cold sweats for months, but she approached it with the same surgical, intellectual precision she had applied to her own emancipation. This was a problem to be solved. She started from the outside in. She read every biography. She studied every film. She downloaded Monroe's interviews and listened to them on her iPod for months, absorbing the breathy, fragile cadence of her voice. To capture the famous wiggle, she spent weeks practicing by tying a belt and later a rope around her knees, forcing her to adopt the hip-swaying gait. She imagined as she walked that her body was being pulled forward by a balloon tied to her breastbone. To get the pout, the parted lip vulnerability, she pictured a tiny scoop of ice cream melting on the back of her tongue. She gained weight to capture Monroe's famous curves. She bleached her own short hair platinum blonde, a painful process repeated every few days, just so her dark roots wouldn't show through the wig. She spent 3.5 hours in the makeup chair every single morning, but the physical transformation was just the scaffolding. The magic of the performance is what she built inside it. Williams didn't just impersonate Marilyn, she channeled her. She captured the profound, almost agonizing vulnerability. She found the childlike fragility, the desperate need for approval, the sharp intelligence lurking behind the dumb blonde facade, and the exhaustion of a woman who had to be Marilyn every second of her life. She later said she gained tremendous sympathy for Monroe's notorious lateness and onset difficulty. She understood the sheer crushing toll it took to transmit this incredible radiance on command. It was, she said, like a superpower, and it was exhausting. The performance was a magical, transformative triumph. It was uncanny. She won the Golden Globe for Best Actress, and she received her third Oscar nomination. She was now in the stratosphere, proving she had a range few actors of her generation could touch. She could be the raw, unvarnished, broken woman of Blue Valentine and the most luminous, iconic bombshell in history. After these two back-to-back artistic peaks, her next choice seemed, on the surface, to be a bizarre left turn. In 2013, she starred as Glinda, the Good Witch, in the big-budget, glossy Disney blockbuster Oz the Great and Powerful. For an actress who had built her reputation on small, dark, independent dramas, it felt like a commercial sellout. Her reason, however, was simple, direct, and heartbreakingly human. She wanted to make a film that her daughter, Matilda, could one day watch. She was a single mother. She was raising a child who would grow up knowing her father only through pictures and films. Williams wanted to give her daughter something with magic in it, a piece of her work that wasn't about grief or broken marriages, but about goodness, light, and hope. It was also a practical decision. As she later explained, she had a child to support, and the financial reality of being a single parent in an expensive city was ever present. The blockbuster gave her the freedom and the funds to then go and do the smaller, artistically fulfilling work that paid almost nothing. This desire to balance her art with the practicalities of motherhood also led her to the stage. Working on Broadway meant she could be in one city, New York. She could have a regular schedule. She could put her daughter to bed at night. In 2014, she made her Broadway debut, taking on another iconic, doomed, and damaged role, Sally Bowles in the dark, brilliant musical Cabaret. It was a grueling test of her voice and her stamina, performing 8 shows a week. In 2016, she returned to Broadway in the harrowing 2-person drama Blackbird opposite Jeff Daniels. The play, about a young woman who confronts the older man who sexually abused her as a child, is one of the most emotionally demanding pieces in modern theater. Her performance was a tour de force of contained rage and shattered vulnerability. It was a commitment to the most difficult, uncommercial, and artistically pure work she could find, and it earned her a Tony Award nomination for Best Actress. But it was another small, devastating film role in 2016 that would bring her back to the Oscars and cement her legacy as perhaps the greatest screen actress of her generation. The film was Manchester by the Sea, written and directed by Kenneth Lonergan. In it, she played Randy, the ex-wife of Casey Affleck's character Lee, a man so completely hollowed out by grief that he can barely function as a human being. Her role is tiny in terms of screen time. She is in the film for perhaps 15 minutes total, but her impact is colossal. It all boils down to one scene, a single 5-minute encounter on a cold, windswept New England street. It is the first time her character Randy and Lee have truly spoken since an unspeakable family tragedy, a house fire caused by Lee's negligence that killed their 3 children. Randy has since remarried. She has a new baby. Lee is a walking ghost. They bump into each other, and what follows is one of the most astonishing, realistic, and heartbreaking scenes in modern cinema. It is not a neat, tidy Hollywood monologue. It is a fumbling, overlapping, messy collision of 2 broken souls. Williams, as Randy, is the one who breaks. She tries to apologize for the horrible things she said to him after the fire, tries to connect, tries to tell him she still loves him, all while dissolving into tears. "My heart was broken," she sobs, her words catching in her throat, her entire body shaking. "And it's always going to be broken. And I know yours is broken too." It is an atomic bomb of emotion, a 5-minute distillation of a lifetime of grief, regret, guilt, and ravaged love. It is almost unbearable in its honesty. There is no vanity, no acting. There is only the raw, exposed nerve of human suffering. The scene became the centerpiece of the entire film, the moment of catharsis that the entire story pivots on. The critics were unanimous. It was a masterclass. She was nominated for her 4th Oscar for Best Supporting Actress. In the span of 8 years, Michelle Williams had done the impossible. She had walked through an unimaginable public fire. She had protected her daughter, rebuilt her life, and channeled her profound experience of loss into her work, creating a string of performances that were not just brilliant, but essential. She was now indisputably one of the greats. Having already dismantled the teen idol trap and weathered a personal apocalypse, her biggest public fight was yet to come. And it wouldn't be on a film set. It would be about her worth. By 2017, Michelle Williams had achieved a level of critical respect that few actors ever attain. With 4 Oscar nominations, a reputation for fearless artistic choices, and the profound quiet dignity with which she had weathered her personal storms, she was, indisputably, one of the greats. She was a single mother who had navigated an impossible path, supporting her daughter by balancing her high art, low pay passion projects with savvy, commercially successful choices. She had starred in the 2017 global smash hit musical The Greatest Showman, a film that, along with her upcoming role in the blockbuster Venom franchise, gave her a new and crucial kind of power: financial independence. She no longer needed a job. She chose her work. This newfound security would be tested in a way she could never have imagined. That year, she was cast in director Ridley Scott's prestigious drama, All the Money in the World, a film about the kidnapping of J. Paul Getty's grandson. After the film was completely finished, its star, Kevin Spacey, was publicly accused of a horrifying string of sexual misconduct allegations. The film, set for a major awards season release, was suddenly toxic, its entire future in jeopardy. In a drastic, unprecedented move, Ridley Scott and the studio made a decision. They would completely erase Kevin Spacey from the finished film, recast his role with Christopher Plummer, and reshoot all of his scenes in an emergency 10-day sprint to meet the original release date. It was an all-hands-on-deck crisis. The entire cast, including Williams and her co-star Mark Wahlberg, was called back to save the film. Williams, believing in the project and the extraordinary effort being made, immediately agreed. When Scott's team called, she told them she would be wherever they needed me, whenever they needed me, and they could have my salary, they could have my holiday, whatever they wanted, because I appreciated so much that they were making this massive effort. She flew to Europe, working over her Thanksgiving holiday, all for what she believed was the good of the film. She was paid a standard per diem of $80 a day, totaling less than $1,000 for her work. The reshoots were a success. The film was saved. Williams, for her performance, even earned a Golden Globe nomination. And then in January 2018, the real story broke. It was revealed by USA Today that for the exact same 10 days of emergency reshoots, her co-star, Mark Wahlberg, had negotiated a separate secret fee of $1.5 million. The disparity was so staggering, so insulting, it almost defied belief. $1.5 million for him. Less than $1,000 for her. That is not a pay gap, it is a chasm. It was a 1,500 to 1 difference. The situation was made even more grotesque by the details that emerged. Both actors were at the time represented by the very same talent agency, William Morris Endeavor, WME. But Wahlberg's team, led by super agent Ari Emanuel, had negotiated a contract that did not require him to do reshoots. Williams' contract, however, did. When the call came, her team didn't negotiate. His did. In fact, reports surfaced that Wahlberg, who also had a co-star approval clause, refused to approve Christopher Plummer for the reshoot until his $1.5 million fee was guaranteed. He had held the entire production hostage. She had offered to work for free. The old Michelle Williams, the intensely private, press-averse woman who had fled from the paparazzi in Brooklyn, might have suffered this profound public humiliation in silence. But this was not a personal tragedy. It was a systemic injustice. This was not a moment for quiet grief. It was a moment for public indignation. The reserved artist who had mastered the language of pain now had to learn the language of the fight. The public outcry was immediate and deafening. It was the smoking gun for Hollywood's systemic, obscene gender pay gap. The fact that it happened to her, an Oscar-nominated actress, a critical darling, a woman who had endured so much public pain with such grace, made the injustice feel even more personal to the public. Her friend and fellow actress Jessica Chastain tweeted the story, and it went viral. The scandal became a global news story. Michelle Williams, in that moment, had a choice. She could retreat or she could fight. She had found her roar. The public shaming worked. Just days after the story broke, Mark Wahlberg announced that he was donating his entire $1 million fee to the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund. Crucially, he did so in Michelle Williams' name. His agency, WME, embarrassed by the exposure of their inequitable practices, followed suit, donating another $500,000 also in her name. Williams' response was a masterclass in power and grace. She didn't gloat. She didn't spike the football. She pivoted. She released a statement that said, "Today isn't about me. My fellow actresses stood by me and stood up for me. My activist friends taught me to use my voice. And the most powerful men in charge, they listened and they acted. If we truly envision an equal world, it takes equal effort and sacrifice." She had taken her personal humiliation and in one move turned it into a $2 million victory for women everywhere. But she was just getting started. This event galvanized her. It changed her. The girl who had emancipated herself at 15 to take control of her career was now a woman determined to emancipate others. She became one of the most eloquent and powerful advocates for pay equity in any industry. In April 2019, on Equal Pay Day, she took her fight all the way to the U.S. Congress. She stood on Capitol Hill next to the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and advocated for the Paycheck Fairness Act. Her speech was not a dry recitation of statistics. It was a deeply personal, powerful, and controlled testimony. She told her story. "It's the kind of story I would have sworn could not happen to me," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with authority. "I've been a working actress since the age of 12. I've been nominated for 4 Academy Awards and I've won a Golden Globe. But this doesn't matter. It won't save you. This is what it's like to be a woman in the workplace. I was paralyzed in feelings of futility, but the example of other women fighting against this injustice has emboldened me." The shy, reserved actress had found her public voice, and that same year she would use it on her industry's biggest stage. In 2019, she returned to television, but this time on her own terms. She starred in and, crucially, served as an executive producer on the FX miniseries Fosse/Verdon. She had power. She had a say. She played Gwen Verdon, the legendary Broadway dancer, and the creative genius who was the often overshadowed partner of the brilliant, philandering director Bob Fosse. It was the role of a lifetime. Williams, a non-dancer, trained relentlessly, capturing Verdon's iconic physicality, her hunched shoulders, her precise turned-in-toe movements. But more than that, she captured her spirit, her resilience, her genius, her unwavering professionalism, and her profound pain at being the woman behind the great man. It was a towering performance. The series was a critical triumph, and on September 22, 2019, at the Primetime Emmy Awards, Michelle Williams won for Outstanding Lead Actress. She walked to the stage, accepted her award, and delivered one of the most powerful, significant, and electrifying speeches in recent awards history. She didn't just thank her team. She took her moment and she used it. She looked directly at the industry that had, less than 2 years prior, told her she was worth 1,500 times less than her male co-star, and she put them on notice. I see this award as an acknowledgement of what is possible when a woman is trusted to discern her own needs, feel safe enough to voice them, and respected enough that they'll be heard, she began. She then thanked the studios, FX and Fox 21, for paying me equally. They understood that when you put value into a person, it empowers that person to get in touch with their own inherent value. And then where do they put that value? They put it into their work. And then she delivered the line that would be quoted around the world, a call to action for her entire industry, and a direct message to every woman of color who faced an even more dire pay gap. And so the next time a woman, and especially a woman of color, because she stands to make 52 cents on the dollar compared to her white male counterpart, tells you what she needs in order to do her job, listen to her, believe her. Because one day she might stand in front of you and say thank you for allowing her to succeed because of her workplace environment, and not in spite of it. It was an electrifying moment. It was the sound of a circle closing. The woman who had been publicly humiliated had turned that private pain into a public crusade. She had won her battle, and then she had immediately turned around to fight for everyone else. The quiet girl from Kalispell, the 15-year-old legal adult, the grieving widow, had become one of the most powerful and respected voices in her industry. Finding her roar was the final piece of the puzzle. The quiet, reserved artist had transformed into one of the industry's most powerful and articulate voices for change. She had turned personal humiliation into a public crusade, securing her power and her legacy as an activist. Having fought all her public battles against typecasting, against grief, against systemic inequality, all that was left was to win the private one. The final chapter of her story would be the quietest, and perhaps the most profound, the building of a hard-won, deeply deserved peace. The pay gap scandal and her electrifying, industry-shaking Emmy speech for Fosse/Verdon marked the final stage of an evolution. The Michelle Williams who emerged was no longer just a survivor, no longer just an artist. She was a leader, a woman who had found her power and her voice. But this public roar was, in retrospect, the sound of a woman finally clearing the ground, making way for a new, private, and hard-won peace. Her personal life, which she had guarded with a ferocious, silent intensity for over a decade, also began to find a new, stable footing. After the trauma of Heath Ledger's death, her path to finding love again was unsurprisingly complicated and deeply private. For years, she was defined by that one tragic relationship. She had other partners, quiet, serious relationships with men like actor Jason Segel and author Jonathan Safran Foer, but she remained in the public and in her own mind, a single mother first. Her focus was singular, raising Matilda in a bubble of normalcy, far from the prying eyes that had turned their grief into a spectacle. Then, in 2018, in a cover story for Vanity Fair that stunned the media world, she revealed she had secretly married. Her new husband was not an actor, not a director, not anyone in the Hollywood sphere. He was Phil Elverum, the intensely private, deeply respected indie musician behind the cult bands, the Microphones, and Mount Eerie. On paper, it seemed like a poetic, perfect union of two broken souls. Elverum, like her, was an artist who had suffered a profound, unthinkable, and public loss. His first wife, the cartoonist and musician Genevieve Castret, had been diagnosed with inoperable pancreatic cancer just 4 months after the birth of their daughter. She died a year later, in 2016. Elverum processed his grief by doing the only thing he knew how. He made an album. The resulting record, A Crow Looked at Me, is widely considered one of the most brutal, direct, and heartbreaking examinations of death ever put to tape. It was recorded in his late wife's room using her instruments and is unadorned by metaphor. It is a raw document of loss. He was a man who understood her specific, hollowed-out pain in a way no one else could. She had lost the father of her child. He had lost the mother of his. Their courtship was quiet, a whisper. She and Matilda moved from Brooklyn to his small, remote town of Anacortes, Washington. It was an attempt to build a new blended family, a refuge of shared understanding against the outside world. But the marriage was short-lived, a bond forged in shared trauma, is not always a foundation strong enough to build a future on. They separated within months and quietly divorced in 2019. Williams, with her characteristic unsparing honesty, later referred to it not with bitterness, but with a sad clarity. It was a relationship born of timing and a desperate, mutual need, a mistake made by two people who saw their own grief reflected in the other. As she later put it, she had bent toward that relationship, but it wasn't a sustainable life. "I never gave up on love," she said. "I always say to Matilda, your dad loved me before anybody thought I was talented or pretty or had nice clothes." That profound foundational love was her benchmark, and she was not willing to settle for a facsimile. She had returned to New York to the set of Fosse/Verdon as this brief, sad marriage was ending. And it was there, in the crucible of the most demanding artistic project of her life, that she found a different and lasting kind of connection. She fell in love with the show's acclaimed director, Thomas Kail. This was not a relationship born from a shared past of grief. It was born from a shared present of intense, collaborative, creative work. Kail was, in his own world, artistic royalty. He was the Tony Award-winning director of the revolutionary Broadway hits In the Heights and Hamilton. He was not a tormented artist. He was a brilliant, grounded, and decisive leader, a man known for his ability to build ensembles and create art out of joy and precision. He was, in many ways, her equal, a fellow professional at the absolute top of his craft. Their relationship was the opposite of her marriage to Elverum. It was not a retreat. It was a partnership. It was quiet, serious, and fast. In December 2019, the news broke that they were engaged and expecting a child. They married in secret in March 2020, just as the world was locking down. And that same year, their son Hart was born. In late 2022, they welcomed a second child, bringing her family to a total of 3 children, including her beloved Matilda, now a young woman herself. The sanctuary she had built to protect her daughter and herself from the storm had finally, after all these years, become a full, bustling, and happy home. She had found a hard-won, deeply deserved peace. Her work, too, reflected this new, grounded maturity. In 2022, she collaborated with the man who is arguably the patriarch of modern Hollywood, Steven Spielberg. And he didn't just cast her in a film. He cast her in his film, his most personal and vulnerable work, The Fabelmans. She was asked to play Mitzi Fabelman, a character based on Spielberg's own creative, complicated, and deeply loved mother, Leah Adler. This was not just a role. It was a sacred trust. He was asking her to embody the woman who, as the film makes clear, was the source of his entire artistic soul. It was another performance of breathtaking vulnerability, but of a different kind. She wasn't playing a woman shattered by one tragic event. She was playing a woman slowly suffocating in a life she loves, but that isn't enough. As the source text so perfectly describes, she played Mitzi not as a suffering saint, but as a vibrant, artistic, and deeply frustrated woman. She's a concert pianist who gave up her career for her family, a sprite who adopts a monkey, a woman who loves her kind, stable husband, but is falling in love with his best friend. Her performance is a high-wire act of conflicting emotions. In one of the film's most iconic scenes, she dances in the headlights of a car on a family camping trip, her body a silhouette of both joy and desperate private yearning. Spielberg later said he knew he had to cast her after seeing her in Fosse/Verdon, and that once she was on set, he never had a single note for her. She had simply become his mother. The performance earned her a 5th Academy Award nomination, her first as a mother of 3, a woman in her 40s, secure in her life, and at the absolute peak of her powers. So, what is the legacy of Michelle Williams? In an industry built on noise, she is a testament to the power of stillness. She is, as Empire magazine named her, one of the 50 greatest actors of all time, celebrated for her almost supernatural ability to portray damaged, broken, and pained characters with heart-shattering sensitivity. Her directors praise this unique, transformative quality. Kenneth Lonergan, who directed her in that single devastating scene in Manchester by the Sea, said she has a flexibility that allows her to be changed in her whole person by a role. She doesn't just play a character, she absorbs them, metabolizes their pain, their tics, their very soul, until there is no artifice left. Her own artistic philosophy, which she has articulated in rare, thoughtful interviews, explains her choices. I'm always drawn to failures, blind spots, the contradiction of human beings, she has said. She is not interested in playing heroes. She is interested in playing people in all their messy, imperfect, and contradictory glory. Her public image remains one of quiet dignity. She is not a recluse, but she is fiercely, surgically guarded. In an age of relentless oversharing, she is the anti-Kardashian, a woman who fundamentally understands the difference between celebrity and artistry. She gives just enough of herself to do the work, to promote the projects, and, as she proved, to fight for the causes she believes in, and she holds the rest back for herself, for her family. This careful balance, this intense privacy, is what makes her so captivating. It's what allows her to be a brand ambassador for a luxury brand like Louis Vuitton one day, her enigmatic, timeless beauty staring out from a billboard, and completely disappear into the role of a penniless drifter in Wendy and Lucy the Next. She has successfully navigated a path that has destroyed so many, from teen idol to indie darling, to Oscar-nominated powerhouse, to public-facing activist, and finally, to a place of settled creative mastery. In the end, the life of Michelle Williams is not a story about fame or even about tragedy. It is a story about resilience. She is a woman who, at 1G, had the ferocious, almost frightening clarity to take legal control of her own destiny. She's an artist who, when trapped in the gilded cage of teen celebrity, secretly plotted her own creative education like a gangster. She is a mother who, faced with an unimaginable public loss, built a fortress of love and privacy around her daughter, protecting her and herself from the storm. And she is an activist who, when faced with a blatant systemic injustice, took her own personal slight and turned it into a public crusade, demanding better for all women. Michelle Williams didn't just survive the crucibles of her life, she metabolized them. She took the pain, the loss, the isolation, and the injustice, and she channeled it all into her work, creating some of the most profound and emotionally honest art of our time. She remains a quiet warrior, a woman who proved that you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be the most powerful. You just have to be the most honest, the most dedicated, and the most unwilling to compromise on the things that truly matter. Her life is her message, that from the deepest grief can come the most profound art, and from the most painful silences can come the strongest voice.